Hey, if you have your Bible with you this morning, open it up to 1 Corinthians. 1 Corinthians. And while we're getting stuff set up, I just want to give a few housekeeping things. This is kind of like when you're invited over to your friend's house, so you know different stuff. The men's bathroom door doesn't shut. So if you go in there, you just want to make sure it shuts behind you, otherwise that gets awkward for all of us. The curtains, there's some space behind it, so you can get behind them and jump out and scare people. I've already tried that a couple times this morning. It's very effective. Another thing, this is really cool that they told me. I couldn't hear this, but through the vents you can hear the kids, which is kind of fun. I think that's awesome. And then they told me first service so they can hear us fairly well, not me, they can hear the music fairly well. And so they said first service while the kids were down there, while we were doing worship, all the kids were singing with us while they're downstairs, which I think, yeah, that was right. It was like, oh, tear. There you go. So, and then the other thing is, after 3 years, for those of you who've been with us for 3 years now, you're going to have a desire after service just because of pure habit to pick up your chair and take it somewhere. Don't do that. The chairs can stay. It's okay. All right, we're going to read this passage out of 1 Corinthians 3 times this morning. So this is 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 24 through 27. And the reason why we're going to read it 3 different times, we're not going to read it all at once, I'll space it out, is this is Paul writing, the Apostle Paul, I want his pursuit to be your pursuit. And so he says this. He says, "Do you not know that in a race all the runners run, but only one gets the prize? Run in such a way as to get the prize. Everyone who competes in the games goes into strict training. They do it to get a crown that will not last, but we do it to get a crown that will last forever. Therefore, I do not run like a man running aimlessly. I do not fight like a man beating the air. No, I beat my body and make it my slave, so that after I have preached to others, I myself will not be disqualified for the prize." Let's pray, then we'll jump into stuff. Lord, we thank you for this chance that we can be here this morning. We thank you for this incredible facility that we get to be just worshiping and just exist as a church. I think it's so much for everyone who gave time and energy and effort and finances to help get us down here and make it what it is today. But Lord, I just ask that in this moment, that as your word is open and preached, that our hearts and minds would be open, and that we would learn to follow you a little closer than when we have walked in here this morning. And I just pray all that in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen. So we're in the last week of the series, Why People Hate Their Christian Neighbor. And we've talked about all these different concepts. And I want today to kind of be the sum up of all the different things. So I want to explain to you, just kind of as clearly as I can, why people hate their Christian neighbor and what we can do about it. And in order to do that, I need to talk to you about dragons, which I know sounds weird. But when I was a kid growing up, most of the stories that I read, most of the movies that I watched, most of the stories that I was told, I was into the fantasy thing. That I thought that was very interesting to me, as most young boys are. And most of the stories that I was a part of had a dragon in them. And that was kind of how the story went, is that you went on this different thing, and then you found out that there was this dragon, I don't mean it as a metaphor, I mean claws, fire-breathing, big, scales, kill you, eat you, that kind of dragon at the end. And so most of the stories, the plot of the story went like this. Okay, so we've got this guy, this main character at the beginning, and then we find out that there's a dragon. And so it goes, okay, so the dragon is going to eat this guy. Because as of right now, when the story starts, the guy is not able to defeat the dragon. And so the flow of the story goes like this. Okay, so this guy, since he knows there's a dragon, he becomes a different kind of person along the way. And so he goes through all these different obstacles and difficulties and challenges. And each time he goes through these obstacles, difficulties, and challenges, he's kind of changed, he's formed, he becomes different. And to the point in time where he gets to the story, where he gets to the end of the story and he faces the dragon, he's the kind of person who can defeat the dragon. He has now become a dragon slayer. At the beginning of the story, he's not able to. But because he knows there's a dragon that he's going to face at the end, he then becomes the kind of person along the way who can defeat the dragon. And the point of the story is, it's never the fact that he defeats the dragon, it's how he changes and becomes a stronger, better person because he knows there's a dragon. And so he becomes someone who is virtuous. He becomes someone who has character. who has integrity, who's courageous, who's brave. And so he becomes all these different things that you want to be because he knows that he's going to have to face the dragon at the end. We could actually say it like this. Much of the virtue that he has in his life is Christian. He becomes very Christ-like to defeat the dragon. Now this is why it's important, is because I believe that for most of our history, our world has been filled with dragons. And these are not, just to be clear, not literal dragons, okay? Because some of you are looking at me like, he has lost his mind. We need to go now, because he's talking about dragons. No, we don't, not literal dragons, but there have been things that have served as dragons in our society since the dawn of time. And it's been all sorts of different things. One of the big ones is, honestly, it's just being able to stay alive, like having food, having shelter, being able to provide for your family. Like you just look at our country's history. My goodness, that was, from the first time people said it, that was 400 years of our country's history. And I'm talking like pre-established country, like when people first got here. Like that was 400 years of our country's history, is how on earth can we just stay alive and have food? And so all these different things come in. Like you had to have lots of kids so they could work at the farm, so you'd have a harvest. And you'd have to get jobs very early so you could provide for your family. Because that was a dragon, is just stay alive. We see there's been other dragons in terms of like the wars that we fought. I have this fascinating conversation over the weekend. We got a chance to go back to Pittsburgh with my extended family, and so there was this one spot where I had about like half an hour, 45 minutes to talk to my grandma, which never happens because my family is huge. Like we have like 87 people on one side of the family. It's just ridiculous. There's too many of them. I don't tell them that, just to be clear. But so like to actually have a one-on-one conversation for a while was something unusual in that moment. And I got to talk to my grandma about how public perception of our culture has changed of the wars that we fight in over the generations. And it's very interesting because she talked a lot about like the war that we're currently engaged in. She talked a lot about the war, the Vietnam War, and what the culture was like and how people responded to that. And she said the thing that was so different, because when she was growing up, she was a teenager during World War II. And she was talking about how that was not like, there was not a group of people who fought that war. Granted, there were soldiers who had much more honor and much more respect from everyone. But she said the way that our country viewed that, everyone fought that war. Like everyone took on sacrifices and everyone took on difficulties. And we had rations and we had meat cards and we had all these different things. And she was talking about how people really embraced it because we understood that we were all fighting that war. And she said the thing that was the most interesting is the way that the people talked about it. That it was not, we're fighting them. It was not an us versus them. She said the way that people talked about it was very much a good versus evil. It wasn't just like, oh, we're in this, what do you think about it? It was, no, this is at its very core, it is the good people fighting what's wicked in the world. And so for that very much, that's a dragon. That is, okay, there is something that is very, very wrong, that we have to take on sacrifices and difficulties along the way in order to do that. And here's what's important, is that as we've had these dragons in our culture, in our society, is not just that they can be beaten, but it's how they change us. So if you know that you need to provide for your family, that is something that you have to do. You're going to embrace difficulty. You're going to take on different things. You're going to become someone who is honest, who's courageous. Because you have to, in the same thing with the wars that we fight. It's going to produce a kind of person who, because there is that dragon, maybe at the beginning couldn't fight it, but since they know there's a dragon at the end, they will become the kind of person who can slay the dragon. The dragon changes us with a character that is very Christ-like. Now this is why it's important, is because I don't think we have many dragons left in our culture. I think in our world today, we don't perceive many dragons that need to be fought, that need to be slain. And so I'm not making comments on the things. I'm trying to make comments on how these things change us. So if I could explain it like this. The war that we are currently engaged in, I'm making no comments on the people who fight in that because they deserve all of our honor and respect. But it's relative indifference in terms of how culture has responded to it. And I think we could all agree in that. If you look back like in our nation's history in World War II, and that was a good versus evil thing, people were very aware of what's going on. The fact that we are still currently engaged in a war is something that most people don't really think about it unless if you have a loved one who's over there or you have been over there. And so it's relative indifference. The issue of providing for your family is no longer a great struggle. Because, and again, I'm not saying that this is a bad thing, but if you're not able to provide for your family, you usually just bank on society to provide for your family for you, right? And again, I'm not making a comment on that. I'm saying that it's amazing how much these things have changed us. Because when you grow up and you believe that it is on me to do this, it produces a type of person who can overcome those obstacles. When those are no longer there are no longer people who can slay dragons. And so what's happened is for thousands of years, the type of difficulties that we face produced a character in people that was very Christ-like. When those obstacles are no longer there, we see a character produced in people that is not very Christ-like. Which is why, as we've talked about this series, we've talked about this idea of what it means to be a restorer. And we've talked about this certain type of Christian. This Christian who doesn't just isolate themselves, who doesn't just protest stuff, who isn't like kind of all those stereotypical Christians, but a Christian who actually looks at the problems of the world that are there and understands that I am here to help restore creation back to what it was intended to be. That I am here to take on the problems of the world. And here's the thing, is that they may not be as obvious, but our world still has dragons. Now, it's usually not in the form of an enemy, and it's not always in the form of providing, but our world still has dragons. They're very different today. The world, if I could say it like this, it wanders. Like most people, they wander through life. There's very little, this is who I am, this is what I'm going, this is what I'm supposed to do. It's, what are you going to do with your life? I don't know. I had an opportunity, I love doing this. They do a thing at the middle school every year where they have them take like a career test, and you go through this evaluation to give kids an idea of what they want to do. And so I'm going through it, and I'm like, so what do you think? Any of these look good to you? And as I went through the boys, like half of them, the only thing they had thought of doing with their entire life was playing sports. And I didn't want to be the crusher of dreams in that moment. Like the first kid, he's like, I want to be a basketball player. And he is like this tall in 6th grade. And so like it was like first one in, so I'm trying to be encouraging. I'm like, oh, okay, great. Well, you have to work really hard. By the 10th kid in, who's like, I'm going to play football. No, you're not. Okay, let's get something on the list, okay? Because that's not going to work. And so I think what we've seen is that when it comes to these things of I'm going to be formed by the obstacles to become a better kind of person, someone who's stronger, the only things that we really pursue today are sports, money, and fame. That like we see this incredible pursuit and this desire to be shaped through the sports that we play, which I love sports, and I think that's incredibly important for sports. We see it with money as people get older. A lot of people, especially people if their time was more spent on sports, they'll quickly take that shift into the business world. And it was, okay, I'll compete, I'll get ahead. Okay, my basketball, football, whatever it is, hockey, curling, whatever, you go down the list. I don't want to leave anybody out on the curling. Whatever that thing is in the Winter Olympics that's coming up where they've got the brooms. There you go. That is like the sport that was made for like housewives. I mean, I don't know how that isn't just filled with housewives and how they don't just clean up. Oh, I'm not saying that mean. I'm not saying that mean. I'm saying or house dads. Okay? That wasn't meant to be offensive. Apparently my compliments are perceived as insults. But what we see is we've got these different things, and so like people pursue it with money. People pursue it with like being known, making a name for themselves. And the problem is that those aren't, don't hear me wrong on this, okay? Because my kids are old enough to play sports, I'm going to push them because I think that drive's important. But if your primary pursuits in life are simply for money, sports, and fame, those are not noble things. Like, do them. I'm not saying those are bad things. Like, do that. Be engaged in that. But those don't produce the kind of character that leads to someone who can slay a dragon. And so if we talked throughout the series, we've talked about a kind of Christian who sees, who is not oblivious to, and who doesn't hide from, but who sees the dragons in the world and understands that those are the problems that we should take on. That sees the people who just wander through life. That sees the brokenness in our society and sees the hopelessness that most people live in day after day. And they don't shrink back. They say, I'm going in and I'm helping. I'm going in and I'm helping. And this is incredibly significant. Because when you see the dragons in the world, it creates the kind of person over time who can slay that dragon. When you don't, you get a lesser kind of person. And so what's happened is because for so long we have had no dragons in our society that we've actually sought to take on, we've had no evil that we seek to go about, is what it's really created, and I only describe this in terms of men, women, you can apply it for yourselves, is a delayed manhood, if that makes sense. Basically, I mean, no one wants to grow up. Because what happened is that for centuries, manhood was the rite of passage where you got to fight the dragon. And so like you were in training, you were doing all these different things, and then when you got to a certain age or a certain spot in life, you were needed in this fight. And so it was something that you were excited about. I can't wait to get to this age when I can be a part of this. When you take away the dragon, no one wants to be an adult. And so what we've done instead is we've blurred the lines between what it means to be a man and what it means to be a boy. And what happens is we've got 40, 50, 60-year-old men who should be fighting dragons who are acting like they're 12 and doing things that they shouldn't be engaged in, being part of things in their life that they have no business being a part of. And it's because they don't see what they're called to fight. And that's what Paul describes here. Is he describes the kind of person, if I could say it like this, who is no longer satisfied with just being saved, but who actually wants to live out their salvation. If that makes sense. Because I think that's the spot where a lot of us find it is, well, you need, and we stress this so much in churches at different times, is you need to get saved. What do I do once I get saved? Don't sin and come to church. Good luck. And it's like we've switched the narrative, the story of our lives, from you grow up and you're in training and now you get to encounter these great problems and you get to take these on in our society, to you need to grow up, get a middle-class job, pay taxes, and not sin. Like, that's not exciting. Like, that's not the life I want. Like, I'm sorry, that's not the life that I want. But if you switch the storyline to, hey, even if I am growing up, middle-class job, pay taxes, don't sin, but you switch the storyline to understanding that I am here on this earth where I am specifically so I can take on the problems of the wandering world, the brokenness of the world, and the hopelessness of the people who I'm engaged in, then it has meaning and it produces a kind of person who can take those problems on. It elevates our character. And so when Paul says this in 1 Corinthians, he says, do you not know that in a race all the runners run, but only one gets the prize? Run in such a way as to get the prize. Everyone who competes in the games goes into strict training. They do it to get a crown that will not last, but we do it to get a crown that will last forever. Therefore, I do not run like a man running aimlessly. I do not fight like a man beating the air. No, I beat my body and make it my slave, so that after I have preached to others, I myself will not be disqualified for the prize. He's saying that I am going to become the kind of person who I need to be so that God can use me to my fullest extent. I'm not just going to wander through this. He says, not like someone running aimlessly, which is where I feel most of us really are for most of our lives. We're aimless. And what happens is that when people talk about God and people talk about faith and all these different things, it's a nice addition. So it's kind of, okay, I'll do this, I'll do this, I'll do that, and you should be saved. You should have God. Like, okay, well, I'll do that too. I'll have that nice little add-on. And so then I've got I go to the Y and I take care of the physical stuff, and I go to church and I take care of the spiritual stuff, and it's good. And we've got all these nice compartmentalizations of our lives, and we go to the different buildings to take care of the different things. And what he's actually describing here is not something that gets added on, but something that changes the entire perspective of everything that you are and everything that you see and how you live and act in every single day of your life. Because you understand that you are not called to do something small, but that there are dragons in our world that need to be slain. And unless if I become the kind of person who can slay those dragons, then nothing will happen. Then nothing will happen. And here's the thing that's so interesting about these stories. It is when you read these different stories and hear these different stories as a kid in terms of the fantasy stories of the dragons, at the end of the stories, they always say this thing. It's always like the big climax of the story is the dragon is defeated. And everything leads up to that last moment. It's and he did this, and he went through this, and he climbed the mountains, he went through the hills, and he went into the cave and faced the dragon, and he killed the dragon. And I think the writers don't understand how people think most of the time. It's because it gets to the end, and that's supposed to be the great reveal of the story, is the dragon is defeated. And here's the thing, no one, for every 8-year-old boy, that's not a realization. That's not stunning to them. It's and the dragon gets defeated. Because we all know that dragons get beaten, right? As an adult, maybe that changes, right? As an adult, all of a sudden it starts to shift, and it's, maybe they can't. Maybe we don't tackle that. Maybe we don't worry about that. That's too much. But as a kid, you're going, it's a dragon. Yeah, let's kill it. Let's cut off its head, because that's what kids think. And so they've always got this reveal at the end of the story of, the dragon gets defeated. And the truth is that's not news to us. Here's what you find, is that when you go through life with that focus, and when you go through life with that perspective, what you find at the end of the story is not that the dragon can be defeated. What you find out is that you never had anything to be afraid of to begin with. And that's very significant. It's not that dragons can fall. It's that I never should have been scared at the start. And so let me explain it like this. And I'm not meaning to make my story sound like a big thing, because in this sense it's not. But I am 29 years old. Society tells me that my life ends at 30 when I'm no longer cool. And news to society, I was never cool to begin with, so it doesn't matter. And what I've had in those 29 years is 2 lifetimes worth of just church junk to deal with, which I know many of you have as well, as I've listened to your stories and as we've talked about different things. And it was so funny when we got this information that we had to move, and we had 30 days to find a new facility. It was interesting, and I'm not saying this negative, but for people who haven't encountered stuff like that before, there was a lot of fear. For a lot of people, it's oh no, very anxious, what are we going to do? How are we going to do this? How are we going to make this work? What's going to happen? What do we do here? And it was there was a lot of fear and anxiety associated with that. And for me, what I found is, and I had a couple people ask me, so much so, they asked me a couple times, are you not worried? Are you not upset? And I really started doubting myself, maybe I should be worried. Because they'd be okay, are you not concerned? No, not at all. I'll tell you when I was worried, when we first started the church, and there were 6 of us sitting around a table, and we said we're going to start a church in 3 weeks. We have no money, no place to meet. We have no idea who will be coming, and my wife was 7 months pregnant. I was a little worried then. But when we got to this, it was no. I'm not. And that's what happens. Is when you go through the difficulties and when you face the different challenges, because you know what you have set out to do, what happens is that you learn at the end not that dragons can be beaten, because you always knew that. You learn that you never had anything to be afraid of from the start. I think one of the most important scriptures in the whole Bible is when Paul writes, "And if our God is for us, then who can be against us?" If our God is for us, then who can be against us? And the funny thing is I think a lot of times when we read that, we hear it as a statement, but we think of it as a question. Because what happens is, like, we'll be in church and it'll be like, "And if our God is for us, then who can be against us?" And we'll walk out the doors and it'll be like, "I'll tell you, them and this, these are the people who are against us." And it feels like just in that moment, like it just feels like the weight of the world just rests on your shoulders. You felt that. You felt it lift off, and you felt as soon as you enter back into those problems, it gets put right back there. But it's not a question. It's a statement. If our God is for us, then who can be against us? And so here is, I guess I have to say, here's my encouragement to you, is to no longer be satisfied with just having faith as a thing. To no longer be satisfied with just having your faith as a part of your life. Because I think for a lot of us, we've accepted the storyline for our lives is, I do this, I do this, I do this, and I have faith, which means I go to church regularly and I try really hard not to sin until I die. And that's not a worthy story to live as part of. That's not a worthy narrative for your life. You were created for far more than that. You were created for better than that. You were created for things that were bigger than that. The storyline of your life is this, is that God radically, through no merit, through no effort of your own, radically saved you through his sacrifice. And saved you to something. To be a part of taking on the problems that are in the world. To be a part of taking on the dragons that exist within our society all over the place. To take on the evil, the wickedness, the corruption, the hopelessness, the brokenness that we see all over the place. And I think the problem for years in terms of why people hate their Christian neighbor is that Christians have stepped back from that. And been satisfied with just being saved instead of actually living out their salvation. And so, like, let me say it like this. If I was sick, if I was like really, really sick, and you had a cure, and you did nothing, I would hate you, right? Like, first of all, I'd be ticked. And then I'd hurl some insults at you. And then I make some snarky, sarcastic remarks, because that's really my wheelhouse. That's what I do. But then I would eventually come to the conclusion that I hated you. Because you had the cure and you did nothing. And that's where we sit. Like that's the arena, that's the environment that we were born into. That's the environment that we live in. And God basically said it like this, is I have called a people to me. And they're the solution. Like, they are the ones who work in all the different sectors of our society and all the different things of our world. And they are the answer to the problems because they take my name and my power and my grace with them. And the problem is that for so many of us, we've just settled. That's what we have. We have settled. When I was growing up and two people were dating, that was the worst thing you could say. And so, like, sometimes you'd see this, like, couple, and you know how it works, like, she'd be hot. And him? You'd be like, what? What's going on there? Like, oh, she's settled. Oh, she's settled. But like, if you're a guy, that's like the best thing that can be said about you. You're like, oh, she's settled. Like, yeah, and I got a ring on her finger. Absolutely. I wasn't taking any chances there. But it means in that moment is that we are living for less than what we could. And I think for most of us, that's the faith that we have in our lives, is we've settled and we've lived for less than what God has called us to. And so hear me clearly on this. You are uniquely positioned. You are uniquely gifted. and you are uniquely called. I'm talking about the person next to you, but I'm also talking to you specifically. You are uniquely gifted. You are uniquely positioned. And you are uniquely called. There is no one on this earth who will encounter the specific people that you will with a specific perspective that you have. And in that is a phenomenal, incredible opportunity to impact all those who you come in contact with and to change the world that you live in. Now you look at it like this, and you go, okay, so if I do that, then what really changes? This is the cynical person understanding who's saying this, because the rest of you will be like, oh yeah, this is great, this is so good. But there's going to be some cynics, and they'll be like, okay, so seriously, so if we talk about the problems of the world is that it's wandering, it's broken, and it's hopeless, so if I do that, then what really happens? What really is accomplished? One person? 2 people? 10 if I'm really outgoing? Like, what is really accomplished? But look at it like this. Look at, and the size doesn't matter, but look at how many people are in this room. What if everybody did that? Like, what if everybody actually did that? What would happen is through no correlation that we could exactly explain, we would see the poverty, hunger problem go away. We would see the divorce rate drop dramatically. We would see all the different things that are symptoms of a broken world start to go away. And no one could ever come back and say, you could never actually trace it and go, well, it was them and them and them, it was that group of people. You could never actually trace it back one to one. But it's what would happen. It's exactly what would happen if everybody actually started living this out and understanding, I'm not just saved, I need to live it out because God has called me to be a restorer of his broken creation. That's what happened in the first century, just to be clear. When the first disciples went out with passion and urgency to everything that they did, what happened was that the world completely changed. This is why we split history in terms of before and after Christ. This is why, is because and that's so funny to me, is people who are skeptics of religion, like, they completely discount that. Like, we tell time differently because of when Christ came. And it has nothing to do with scientific advancements or anything like that. It's because literally, when Christ came and sent out his disciples, the world became different. And so it became necessary to tell time differently based upon when he sent out his disciples, because that's when the world changed. And why do we think anything less could happen today? Do we think the verse of, and if our God is for us, then who could be against us, was like, oh, no, that expired at year 200. No, that's not for you. No. It's just as true today. And so here's my encouragement to you, is to understand that the world that you live in has dragons. Very, very real dragons. Has problems that need solved, has issues that need people to go into and to cure. One relationship at a time. One conversation at a time. And when you understand that that's the world that you live in, you become the kind of person who can slay dragons. When you live in the storyline of, I'm just here to be saved and not sin, you become something much less than that. But when you know there is a dragon at the end of the story who you need to encounter, you become something far greater. And this is the important part, is you become someone who God can and will use. Let me pray for you. Father, I ask that you take our notions, our thoughts on what it means to follow you, and you just blow them up. that for so many of us, we've just had this belief for most of our lives that you call us to small things, that you call us to insignificance. And Lord, that has nothing to do with you. That has nothing to do with you, and I have no idea how it became part of the storyline. Father, help us to understand. Help us to just clearly understand the urgency that you give us, the vision of what you have called us to, and the type of people you have invited us into becoming. And Lord, I ask that we would do exactly that. That we wouldn't settle for a simple faith that leads us to retreat into the corners when the world shows its ugliness and brokenness. But that we would be the people who take on the challenges, who take on the problems of the world, and understanding that as we do, it is you who goes with us and gives us strength and gives us power and gives us wisdom in those very moments. Lord, let us become a people who follow you and who understand that you are for us. And that's not a question, it's a statement. That you are for us, and you are far greater than any power that could come against us.